Good evening and welcome to Monday Night Alive. My name is Joe Johnston and I'm going to be your host this evening. Unfortunately, Rosalie Bocelli, who's also the producer of the show, has just had some surgery, so she's not going to be able to be here tonight. Usually she will do some of it when I'm also host. But I do have the privilege tonight of having Dr. Seth Hollar, who's assistant professor at NC State in electrical and mechanical engineering, and is very interested in especially local transportation, how we get around our cities. Welcome to Monday Night Alive, Seth.
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you. And I understand that you've got some great things that you're working on at NC State that have to do with how we get around the city. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the project that I've been working on is called ECO-PRT, or Ecological or Economical Personal Rapid Transit. And the whole idea here is to re-envision how we get around. Mm-hmm. So traditional transportation, light rail, bus, the ability to put that in can be somewhat costly. Like, for example, light rail can be $50 to $100 million a mile. And even then, it doesn't necessarily address the last mile issue. It might drop you off at a station and you still might have a half mile, mile away from where you need to go. Mm-hmm. So and working with Marshall Bray, my colleague at NC State, what we came up with is a solution that drives down the cost and at the same time makes it extremely convenient for people to get around. Great. And this is based on small, lightweight, electrical, autonomous vehicles.
Autonomous vehicles, electrically operated by battery then, rather than connected to a rail or anything like that, or overhead wire.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, and you're actually doing some design work in a three-dimensional design work over at NC State?
Yeah, so Marshall and I got together when he first started at NC State, and we got together, in fact, over at China Queen, which isn't too far away from Centennial campus. And when we were discussing things, the idea of transportation came up, and the costs for putting things down. How can we make something better? And a few years back, he had written something for the News and Observer about how to put Raleigh on the map with automated vehicles, and I'd followed the DARPA Urban Challenge, which is a autonomous vehicle competition out in California. And in that conversation, it kind of evolved into, well, there's actually a solution out there. Mm-hmm. And that's where we hit upon kind of a smaller framed vehicle than what's out there today, mm-hmm. that can move people around in a much more flexible manner than usual. But that was just a concept. And we had talked to a number of people. North Hill is an example, mm-hmm. RTP, City of Raleigh, City of Cary, City of Los Angeles even. And I think there was a certain level of excitement or interest, but the problem there was that we suffered from it just being a concept. And to move the idea forward, we felt it necessary to not only describe how it could operate, but actually build it to demonstrate the key elements of it.
But there are some PRT systems or personal rapid transit systems existing in the world now, right?
Oh yes, and Morgantown, West Virginia is probably the main or the original one that was built 1970s. The federal government had funded it. Mm-hmm. It tended to be, though successful, the cost exceeded people's estimates, and by and large, that system wasn't replicated.
Right.
A larger vehicle, about 10,000 pounds, holding about 20 people.
20 people.
Right.
But there's one at Heathrow Airport, right? That's smaller and.
So Ultra PRT, that's the name of the company that has. Ultra is no longer its own company. It was actually absorbed by the Heathrow authority itself. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Though still operating as Ultra, it's a subsidiary or a department within the organization. And so those are smaller vehicles, much like what we're talking about, a little bit larger, on the order of maybe 2,000 pounds in weight, holding up to 6 people.
Up to 6 people.
And they demonstrated a single line, I believe, on the order of like 2.4 miles, running between a satellite parking area and a gate.
And the gates, right?
And that's been operating for, I want to say since 2011.
Wow.
I'm not sure of the dates, but again, you could describe it as kind of a pilot, because it hasn't expanded. There's been attempts to expand it, but for one reason or another, it hasn't expanded at Heathrow or in some other areas.
Right.
Some recent news for Ultra, though, is that they're exploring the use of those vehicles actually on the city streets of London.
Wow.
So we'll see where that goes.
Wow. Okay. Now I understand you have a video that Darren will be able to show us a little bit of actually what's going on at NC State. So we'll ask Darren Lay to put that on for us.
Hey, I'm Marshall Brain, and I am the director of the Engineering Entrepreneurs Program at NC State. And with Dr. Seth Hollar, I am also working on the Eco-PRT project, which will revolutionize transportation on campus. The Eco-PRT system is a new revolutionary transportation system that will solve the circulator problem. So if you think about NC State, it needs to move people all over campus, so it's a small contained area that needs people circulating around. Eco-PRT is perfect for that kind of environment. You could find that at an airport or a corporate campus, but at NC State we particularly need it to connect Centennial Campus with Main Campus over on the other side of Western Boulevard in a way that's super efficient to get back and forth. So the Eco-PRT system will replace the buses in a sense, and the advantage of this system, if you ever ride the buses, you know that there's a couple things that cause a lot of delay. First, you have to wait for the bus to get there. Then you have to wait as the bus stops at every stop. And then the bus gets stuck in a lot of traffic and traffic lights and so on once it gets on Avent Ferry Road and Dan Allen Drive and Western. So the idea behind Eco-PRT is the car will ride on elevated track, fly over Western Boulevard, and let you get between the two libraries in like 5 minutes. That's our goal. The Eco-PRT system started with Dr. Seth Hollar and I having lunch and kind of co-commiserating about the need for a better transportation system on campus. Seth is a PhD in mechanical engineering and is kind of the mastermind behind the whole thing, and he's also been great at getting a bunch of students involved. There's probably been 50 students who have contributed to building the test track, building the vehicle, designing the new vehicle that's coming up now. So students have played a huge part in this project, and we cannot be grateful enough for the contribution they've made.
Okay, well thanks Darren for showing us that. So you're actually building wooden models of the PRT, the Personal Rapid Transit vehicles?
Let me correct that. We have a test mule that we built out of steel, battery powered with motors, and then to test it out, we have built a test track out of wood.
Okay.
And so that test track is right outside our building.
Okay.
That demonstrates the various facets of the vehicle.
Great.
And in addition to that, we're moving to a phase 2 vehicle that includes a few more creature comforts and a little more capability.
Okay.
Like our first vehicle has more or less polycarbonate or Lexan all around the vehicle, so it's completely see-through, which is great if you want to be really warm inside the vehicle during the summer. So, but it being just a prototype, right?
Right.
So our second vehicle is actually going to have a fiberglass molded body with air conditioning inside.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Full suspension, full braking.
Wow.
All-wheel braking.
And have you done anything with the automatic control or guidance?
Yeah, we tested it. So what you saw in the video, I was actually testing it. We were manually controlling it, believe it or not, with an Xbox controller.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So it's kind of funny to ride it with something I've been playing with. That you normally play video games with.
Right.
But we've implemented a automated driving element to it as well, and we're still testing that out. We've done 1 or 2 test drives with that. And then there's the other element of sensors. So the vehicle needs to see in front of it in order to stop if there's anything, very obvious, right?
Yeah. Somewhat similar to, for instance, the Google is developing, and maybe some other people are developing driverless cars.
Right.
And a lot of those features are being incorporated into regular cars. For instance, sensing a person or an object in front and slowing down automatically.
Oh, absolutely. And you'd be surprised at how quickly that technology is coming to the fore.
Right, yeah.
I had the benefit of being invited to a work session for the state of North Carolina where they're looking at developing a roadmap for autonomous vehicles. And that happened just like a week ago or so. This technology is happening so fast.
Wow.
How can North Carolina prepare itself to I think most people see this as to accommodate this new way of getting around for autonomous vehicles. Now, the Google car drives on regular streets. It has a fairly expensive set of sensors for getting around. It's improving and evolving. Where we kind of differentiate ourselves from the Google car is we are much smaller, giving us the ability to go places and without taking up as much of a footprint. And also having the ability to build our own dedicated roadways at a fraction of the cost it might take to build, say, an extra lane of a highway. So an extra lane of highway may cost $10 million a mile, and for what we're looking for in terms of elevated guideway, order of magnitude is like $1 million a mile.
Okay.
So,
and it looks like you're going to be able to accomplish that goal or come pretty close to it?
So we've had, for example, initially Kimley Horn looked at doing a first order analysis of what it would take to actually construct a guideway, and it came within that $1 million a mile.
Wow.
And then also we've had a structural engineer look at it as well as kind of a double verification that this is completely possible.
Right, well that's great, yeah.
So we're quite excited about this. And if you think about it in today's infrastructure world, when you build a road, you have to build it to handle a truck, for example, that weighs 100,000 pounds.
Right, yeah,
and,
sure.
Our vehicles are being built to weigh just 500 pounds, and if you consider two passengers, that's just 1,000 pounds.
And the vehicle would cost around?
So in production, it's not unreasonable to think that these vehicles will cost $10,000.
$10,000, right.
Smaller quantity, of course, at an increased price, but
and a vehicle will carry two people in line rather than side by side, correct?
Right, and so as you saw in the video, these vehicles are less than 3 feet wide.
3 feet,
and in fact, we had a strict design requirement to make them no more than 31 inches, at least for the mules. And the sole reason for that was we had to fit it through our lab doors.
Oh,
Our lab doors weren't any larger, they're like 32 inches. So.
And and you also will have a car that can carry wheelchairs too, correct?
Yes. So the idea is that you can have different variants of these vehicles depending on what you want to carry.
Right.
We've actually had we could put a bicycle in one of them,
wow,
for example,
okay.
and students, and it shouldn't be understated that students were a major driver in building these things. So for example, the test mule, that was almost entirely undergraduate student driven. So day one, when we started looking at this, we were looking at ADA compatibility and what that meant. How could it accommodate wheelchairs?
Oh, great! Yeah, great. And also, in case of a difficulty or an accident, somebody had a heart attack or something, or there was actually a collision, then it would be accessible too, correct?
Yes. Details still have to be worked out, but no doubt, on every vehicle you would have a big red button. Maybe even cameras inside.
Right, yeah.
You hit it, if there's an emergency, an operator comes online, assesses the situation. Maybe even they command the vehicle to drive straight to the hospital or to the nearest emergency care facility.
Right, right, which
for immediate attention.
Right. And if this works well, say for at NC State, you possibly see extending it to other places. For instance, Cameron Village is close by, right?
That's a great point. And designing it, the whole idea was to get it at a price point that made sense, so that you'd have more of a market pull instead of kind of a subsidized push to it.
Right.
And we've modeled our costing so that it would be just under what I think the federal tax rate is for driving your car for business purposes, like on the order of
55 cents a mile.
55 cents a mile.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing is when that works, then it completely turns around how the incentives operate. And so if you have 35,000 students that are being shuffled between main campus and Centennial campus, suppose, for example, Cameron Village, like, wow, just for a few million more dollars, I don't have to build any more parking, but I have access to this huge population where they can go and it kind of falls forward. If Cameron Village goes in, and it's not a long stretch to go to Glenwood South or to go downtown, and it has that kind of element of possible organic growth, if you will.
And of course, I was telling some of my train buddies, model train buddies, that also possibly extending it like to the new train station that would be downtown too, which would give a big advantage to travel by train too, because you'd be able to get other places besides the center of town. Right, and that combines in kind of the circulator concept, or helping solve the last mile. A large reason why a number of us don't actually take transportation, public transit, a lot of the times, is because to actually get to that bus station is a half mile or a mile or more walk. But if you had, for example, and one concept of eco-PRT, suppose you have these vehicles stationed within neighborhoods, and someone could call one up within a neighborhood and it would immediately take it to some transit stop that's on the edge of the neighborhood where they can actually take public transportation. So very much facilitating the growth of alternative means of getting around. And one of my personal goals here is to demonstrate, to get us beyond the point where we're driving cars, just one of us per car, in what I would consider kind of an inefficient way of using our existing roadways. So actually the cost to the community would be less too, because the community would not necessarily have to provide as many parking spaces. And yes, there is a very strong relationship between having the ability to get people around, say in some sort of transit system, and then what you have to, as a developer or city, provide. Parking, each parking spot, say in a city, can cost $20,000 to $30,000 a spot. And that if you can take, for example, a typical development, there is more space or land dedicated to the car than to the actual people. Exactly. Back early on, before vehicles started becoming more becoming more prevalent, cities were kind of designed around people. How could they get from A to B, and then efficiently? So stores were close together. People lived next to where they're going. With the invention of the car, suddenly have these huge parking lots that spread things out, making it much harder for people to get around, and it just kind of built on itself. And so we have the kind of the design that we have today, where it's very hard to walk around to go somewhere without having to go through islands of seas of parking to get to your islands of storage. I think some of us are familiar with the work of Dr. Donald Shoup, who's done a lot of study on parking, and that there's no such thing as free parking. Somebody has to pay for it. And if you either make the parker pay for it, or or it's incorporated into everything else you buy. So we have a choice there as to who's going to pay for it, you know.
Yes, and it's, you know, the way a lot of this is worked out is it's the cost of the parking is embedded in everything we do,
right?
Because it's required as part of a building project.
Right.
If you have an apartment, you're given parking whether you like it or not, because most cities don't unbundle parking from the apartment to give people the choice. Or if you're going shopping, you know, that parking is paid for by higher prices.
Right. Usually the merchant would pay for it, or the city would pay for it if it's street parking, and therefore everybody who uses that business, or even if they don't park, would end up paying for it.
Yeah, and so it creates an unusual incentive favoring the people who drive versus people who don't drive, because if you don't drive, you still have to pay those premiums on your apartment or shopping.
Right.
You know, which kind of feeds on itself.
Exactly, yeah. You've been also involved in a movement here called YIMBY. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that stands for Yes in My Backyard. And
yes in My Backyard, okay.
It's kind of the opposite of what people refer to and No in My Backyard.
Right.
And so the whole idea here is, or its initial genesis was, I live in the Cameron Village area, and it's experiencing some growth. And whenever new projects come online, you know, there's always, what I see is large, you know, very loud or vocal resistance to these projects. And some of these projects are mixed-use projects, and what that means is they may have retail or some sort of commercial in addition to apartments or residences. And the prevailing thought is when you provide a good mix of those within the community, people will end up walking or biking instead of having to get in a car and drive somewhere else.
Right, yeah.
And so I only saw that as a good thing.
Sure.
And there was actually, though, no voice out there for people to support these elements of mixed-use, denser development, and basically Cameron Village is just a hop away from downtown, so it's very much still part of its urban core. So I got together with some others, and we formed what I refer to as kind of an informal group to discuss these things and to provide that counterbalancing voice for growth in Raleigh. Because the issue is, if you're not going to have growth in your urban core that supports these elements of pedestrian friendliness, then development ends up happening on the outskirts.
So otherwise, if you don't have, if you will, density in the city, you then end up having people take over the forest and farmland. Right?
Yeah, you take up the forest and farmland, and in addition, you create an environment. So suppose they don't build downtown; they build on the outskirts, outside of 540.
Sure.
So you're contributing to traffic, because outside of 540, there's just no way to get around except for driving, right?
Right.
And then you have the element of, you know, kind of like what you're saying, is taking over forest, farmland, and what I would consider is a relatively inefficient use of space. If you, Whereas if you develop and the core area, you reverse those effects. You have, you know, less intensity on the traffic, and as Raleigh as a whole, and no one wants to become the new Atlanta is the Austin in terms of traffic. Being fairly horrible. So that's kind of what I aim to have, is not to be the Atlanta or the Austin.
Or the Austin.
That's happening today.
Right. And speaking of walkability, I'm going to give a shameless plug for another program that is on our channel here on RTN 10. It's called Perils for Pedestrians, and it's produced by a fellow named John Wetmore, who lives in the DC area. He sends it out, and I used to ingress it here by hand, but now we have it so that he can send those out electronically, and the staff here will actually put it on the air here. It's just before this program on Monday nights. In other words, it's at 8 o'clock on Channel 10, or at Channel 10 on Time Warner, or Channel 99 on UVerse. So a shameless plug for that program. Do you see anything else happening in Raleigh that interests you, and especially in terms of walkability and how to make our city more walkable, more accessible, more interesting to walk around too?
That's a great question. And before I jump on that, I want to do my own shameless plug
Okay.
as well. Today we just found out for the Eco PRT project that the NC, North Carolina Department of Transportation, has awarded us a contract of $300,000.
Wow.
And so that lends our effort in a huge amount of credibility, and we're very excited to move forward with that.
Great, great.
Jumping back to your other question about what can Raleigh do to improve its walkability. You know, I think a big element of it is in metrics, actually being able to measure its current state of walkability, actually being able to measure, you know, how, you know, in terms of bicycle usage, what's the trend, and the other element of it is you're trying to understand what is the correlation of what you do in one area and what its effect on the walkability is. So a good example is there's a Cameron Village small area plan that is wrapping up right now. And before it even got started, some people at YIMBY got together and asked the city to put together some pedestrian metrics in addition to vehicular metrics, because it was very much focused on doing vehicle counts. And I felt, well, if you're going to do vehicle counts, you might as well do pedestrian counts and bicycle counts.
Right,
and there's
exactly.
new developments coming on board, and how is that affecting the pedestrian and the dog walker counts or what have you.
Right.
And if you have the ability to understand those and measure those, you have the ability to model. If I do A and B here, how is that going to affect the walkability there? So getting those numbers or that data, I think that would help the city hugely in being able to better lay out the city for walkability.
Right. Many of our streets and many of our shopping centers typically have parking in front of the place, usually between the sidewalk and the building itself. Is that a good idea?
You know, one of the worst parking lots I've ever gone through is the Whole Foods parking lot off of Wade Avenue. I swear I've nearly gotten killed there once or twice. It's how do we develop a society where we force pedestrians to be within cars, and parking lots are the single worst thing that I've ever seen. Like there's no thought to actually trying to separate vehicles from people in parking lots. You could think of how you could put paths down between vehicle parking spaces so pedestrians are separated, but no, it's absolutely awful where they just throw a bunch of parking, paint a bunch of lines, and then they just expect people to defend them for themselves. We've had it developed in our mindset that we're always supposed to be aware of cars all the time because that's how we grew up, But it doesn't really have to be that way. Why do we have to be forced to interact with cars as pedestrians, as like say a 100 or 200 pound person versus a 4,000 pound vehicle? It's insanity. Why can't we make a better effort to improve pedestrian safety, but in addition to that, remove the anxiety that all of us have when we're crossing streets or walking around or going to parking spaces.
Right. Let's see. Anything else you see that? Well, we also mentioned it's probably not too interesting to walk on a sidewalk where all you see is cars. I think there's a tendency in new developments, at least the ones that are more pedestrian friendly, to move the building closer to the sidewalk and then have the parking in back.
Yeah, if anywhere you can separate cars and certainly, removing the parking spaces, I absolutely agree with that. Including some nice green areas is a big plus. When I lived in London, they had pocket parks all over the place that people used a lot. Creating those pleasant areas where people like to be. When another element of it is how busy is the street that you're trying to say you're trying to convert an area to be pedestrian friendly. Element might be the pleasantness, but is it really pleasant if you're along a street that's very busy?
Right. Yeah.
Like maybe there was some conversations about Western Boulevard. Could that potentially ever be a pedestrian friendly area? But with 2 lanes going each way with initial 5th lane for turning and optimizing it for traffic flow, it's a fairly unpleasant pedestrian environment. So that has to be taken into account as well. I've always advocated for within the Cameron Village Shopping Center having some sort of center green area.
Right.
That's a major collecting point for people, and the actually biggest park within the Cameron Village Shopping Center is the tiny little play park behind Chick-fil-A. Which isn't very large at all, but you always see people there. If you could capitalize on that need, you can create a bigger space. It would be very exciting for the area.
Yeah, I know. I've learned that having a isolated area or a pedestrian safety area in the middle of the street is a great thing. Even on, for instance, Capitol Boulevard, I often take the bus from around Home Depot up by Spring Forest Road, and one time or the other, I will have to cross Capitol Boulevard. Well, you can walk up, and that's what you're supposed to do, really. Walk up to the traffic light, wait for the light, and then maybe walk back. But I noticed that a lot of the people that use that it's an informal median strip. It's actually more of a gully, for water. But most of the people that I followed now, see what they do, they actually cross 1/2 of the road at a time, then they're in a safety zone.
Right.
It's not official, but it works great. And then wait for the other lane to clear, and they get across in much less time, even on Capitol Boulevard, which everybody knows is pretty busy.
Well, another item to pedestrian friendliness is how long does it take to get to where your surrounding is.
Right, sure.
If you have to walk up 200 feet, cross the street, and walk back 200 feet, that reduces the pedestrian friendliness of it all.
Yeah. On the other hand, of course, an environment that's pedestrian friendly means that we are doing more of our transportation by walking and by human powered. And this, of course, has a big effect on obesity rates, and it's been very interesting. I've been to a couple of pedestrian conferences, and some of the people that have a lot to say there are health professionals, because they're seeing that now even kids, of course, our parents are afraid to let their kids walk to school, even maybe half mile, quarter of a mile, which is not very far, and which would be good exercise for them. But if we could have more pedestrian-friendly streets, especially around schools, kids would get more exercise in their normal course of events.
Yeah, I think there's study after study that's demonstrated that correlation, right, between walking and having a healthier lifestyle.
Yeah. Okay. Getting back to your eco-PRT, or economic, ecological, personal rapid transit. We've got some pictures that Seth has brought us. Can we bring those up, Darren? And you can see tell us what we're seeing here.
So what you're seeing here is our early kind of design concepts for the guideway of the vehicles, and in this case, it's showing how there's a merge on an elevated guideway. So you could consider this as kind of telephone pole-sized steel poles up about 15-16 feet in the area, and steel bridge structures are being supported in between.
Wow. And I think this also points out one more important thing about personal rapid transit. Unlike a bus, it doesn't stop at every stop, correct?
Right, so there's 2 elements to it. One is, these are small, so you're riding it by yourself or say with a friend, which means that you have absolutely no reason to stop except at your final destination, and you're vastly increasing your convenience time. And without a fact, people decide how they're going to go in a city based on how long it takes.
Right, sure.
There could be some element of how much money it costs.
Right.
But by and large, people will not take or choose a solution that takes too long.
Right.
And so this seeks to help address those issues. And the other side of it, it's not like a bus line. The various routes that these PRT vehicles take, if there's a split in the route, it can automatically switch routes. It's not like you have to get off one vehicle and get on another vehicle just to change lanes.
The vehicle itself will switch and alternate its route according to where your destination is.
Yeah, exactly. And we're there's an element of running it on its own dedicated roadway, but then also kind of farther down, looking at exploring, driving it and existing roads at slower speeds, how it could get around there as well. So there's kind of this dual mode flexibility in these vehicles.
Sure. Okay, and here's another picture. You want to talk about this?
Yeah, this is a picture in North Hills with the guideway on top. I think that's Six Forks Road, actually. So there's a lot of discussion right now in North Hills about how there's growth, and everyone loves the growth, but the traffic is a challenge as well. And if you go and talk to people who live there, actually crossing the street, Six Forks is actually a big challenge as well. Right. And that picture was supposed to show just how little infrastructure you need to cross a road using these vehicles and the vehicles can be more or less stacked head to tail as they're moving along. So even they're small and just hold 2 people at a time on average, they can have fairly large throughput on the order of like, 3 to 5,000 people per hour.
And a typical lane of car traffic, is about 1,800 vehicles per hour per lane, and it doesn't make any difference what speed it is, because cars have to stay at least 2 seconds apart. And I know AARP in their classes recommends 3 seconds apart, which would then be about 1,200 people per hour, or 1,200 vehicles per hour. And if you just have one or slightly above one average person per car, that's a lot smaller than these vehicles, the personal rapid transit vehicles you're trying to develop, in a much smaller space.
Yeah, exactly. You're basically more efficiently using the guideway that you have. It's not only a smaller, skinnier guideway, so you're using up just 3 feet instead of 12 feet.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But also you have the vehicle spacing that you can control, so you're definitely pushing a lot more people through on that single guideway than, say, a traditional lane on a road.
And this looks like a cutaway of one of the vehicles.
Yeah, so Technicon Design, based in Greensboro, Brent Wickham, he came to us when we presented 2 years ago, and Technicon Design is an automotive design company, and they work with a number of the tier 1 suppliers, and he was so excited by the concept, he started working with us, and what probably really got us moving forward was when he started putting together these renderings of these vehicles that I could never do, and then that's one of the renderings that he showed that he put together for us.
Cool. Very interesting. Okay, let's look. What is this we're seeing here?
So this is like a guideway, and you can see in the top there's a train that weighs 100,000 pounds. And if you think about it, a train might come once every 2 minutes, once every 10 minutes. But over some specific section of guideway, it might be over that section of guideway 1% of the time or less. So most of the time, guideway is actually holding no load whatsoever. And then all of a sudden it has to carry 100,000 pounds. And so below, you see the Eco PRT vehicles, and they only weigh 1,000 pounds, but they're coming continuously.
Right.
And so the idea here is, you might think that, say, a train or a bus can hold more people or handle more capacity, but the mere fact that you can run these vehicles say with headways of every 2 seconds, they can be equivalent. And the headway,
of course, is the time between vehicles.
Yeah, the time it takes another vehicle to come after the other vehicle has left.
Yeah. Okay. Before we finish our section here, I'd like to give another shameless plug. I'm also a model railroad enthusiast, and these two things tie together. personal rapid transit and trains. But I belong to the Neuse River Valley Model Railroad Club. We've just moved into a new club site, which is very close to Peace College, very close to Watkins Grill, for those of you who know Raleigh. And on March the 12th, we're going to have an open house. And you can see all the information on our website, nrvclub.net there. And the location of our club is 1615 Old Lewisburg Road, which, if you know where Watkins Grill is, just about a mile north of Peace College, look around there and you'll see a big radio tower. Well, our club site is adjoining that big radio tower. Okay, and so I'd like to invite all of you to support us there. Okay, well, I sure thank you for coming, Seth. It's really been interesting.
I'm very excited to come here. Thank you so much for inviting me, Joe.
Oh, you're welcome. And I think Rosalie has prepared something for us, some interesting things that she's also interested in. And we hope you join us next month for Monday Night Alive, when we'll have something more new and exciting, possibly music, possibly interviews with people that are doing some interesting things in Raleigh. So thanks for joining us, and let's see what Rosalie has prepared for us.